I was in trouble. I messed up my family. I was getting arrested. I felt like less than human because of the way I was treated, because I was a drug addict. I hated myself because I knew that what I was doing was morally wrong. I felt distant from my family. They made me feel like an outcast, and I felt like an outcast because of that, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop.
In order for the residents or any of the newcomers to come here, they need to set an example for us. In order for us to go through the process or to even make it where they're at, we need some kind of experience from other people that went through the process.
If the staff's not honest, the participants aren't going to be honest. If you're not telling me the truth, and I don't know where you're coming from, why should I tell you anything? Where am I coming from? I mean, I'm from the streets. I've had a tough time of it. Everybody I've talked to on the streets is lying, so I'm going to come into this program, and if you're not honest with me, why should I be honest with you?
If there isn't honesty, you might as well lock up the doors, because eventually it will catch up to all the way to the top, to the executive director, and there will be no people that want to participate in the program, because if they're unable to trust the staff there, it's just like maybe their experiences outside of the therapeutic community where people couldn't be trusted.
You know, that to me is not therapeutic. That's like people who trust me, or who I can trust and love. I can give them my love by telling them my story. Then by accepting their story, I accept their love. And that's hard too.
I know one of the aspects that made this community safe for me was just to be able to go into a group, and those people that had been here at an extended period of time or who were staff, to run their stories in a very honest level. I'm talking in detail. I'm talking about showing the emotions, the crying, the anger, the pain, the hurt, and to continue doing that. And just by continually that demonstration and just having that constantly in your group setting, eventually you're going to realize that it's a safe setting for you to say those difficult and true things that you've been holding in.
The progression that's allowed within the penal system is inhibited because the system isn't ready to teach certain skills like family skills, relationships, honesty.
Basic assumptions of a therapeutic community are a way or directions for changing and transforming the lives of many people, not just one person. The assumptions of public versus private and of the therapeutic community, along with the others, are stepping stones for creating opportunities for men and women and young people, homeless, substance abusers, whatever the particular problem is. These assumptions, if we, who work with folks like I was, follow these guidelines and always remember them and always remember our role, will help thousands of people instead of just one or two people that I could see in an office or that other professionals could see in their office. The transformation of a human being can take place in the context of humanity and community. And these guidelines, and these are not the end-all that you'll see here, but these guidelines can provide a way for transformation and habilitation, which is what we want to happen for folks.
Last night we went through the history of the Oxford group, AA, and brought ourselves up to the beginning of the therapeutic community movement. Oxford Group essentially ended in 1926, didn't have anything to do with addiction, didn't have anything to do with criminality. It was a movement, human potential movement of its day. Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12-step effort, started in the early 30s in the Depression. Initially was aimed just at alcoholism, has now expanded to where it's really common in any city, not only in the United States, but it's a construct that's known all over the world, and 12-step meetings have expanded to include narcotics and overeating and sexual problems and all those other kinds of things. AA is now, 12-step is really mainstream. And Synanon, which became known as the first therapeutic community. Both the Oxford Group and the 12-step movement had a very strong Christian religious base. The Oxford Group was right out of church, and AA has a very, very strong spiritual tradition, encouraging its members to have a spiritual awakening, encouraging its members to have some sort of a conversion. Synanon was a departure from that in the sense that it went to the secular. Synanon was a departure because the fellowship in Synanon included people living together, not only meeting together. But all three of those efforts, and particularly the 12-step and Synanon, did have a focus on absolute honesty, did have a focus on community, did have a focus on fellowship. And we need to know that to where we stand today in 1992, the non-medical models for this work have a real emphasis on community. How do people touch one another? How can people find the similarities between them? The Synanon talked about God in terms of entheos, the God within, enthusiasm. There was some reference made. There was a daily prayer that was recited that was taken from the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi. What was it like before there were, quote, drug programs like this for people who had been incarcerated, for people who had been really thrown out, for people who had used drugs for long periods of time, for people who had been criminals? What was it really like? I encourage you to talk to some people, if you ever have an opportunity to meet them, who were in Bellevue Hospital in the 50s and were put in straitjackets, who went to Lexington, Kentucky and were part of the LSD experiments. Gee, maybe if we give addicts LSD, that'll do something. Who were in the Fort Worth, Texas hospital prison programs. The kinds of strategies and interventions that were used then, we would think today were really inhumane. James Triano, who passed away recently, was in a straitjacket for 2, count them, years as a young heroin addict. Very, very different from what we know today. The names of a lot of the early pioneers in this have really largely been forgotten.
And I felt like I could see my future ahead of me. I remember you seeing the old winos and stuff and some of the old hypes. And I used to say, Jesus, that's going to be me. And I couldn't see any way to stop it. I didn't really think until like I heard some of the older guys talking, well, you can go to Lexington, Kentucky, you know, or Fort Worth, or, you know, because that was the only 2 places. And then I think they opened up some ward in Manhattan State General or something. But that was about it. And but I never tried those. I was, I guess, right around that time, Synanon was just starting or something. It was only a few years old, 5 years old at the time. 63, they started 58 or something. Now, I didn't know it then, but now what I feel is because, you know, I stood clean a long time, and then I fell again. And the insights that I've had about the drug addiction and what it does to you is that it produces this overwhelming fear in you that you can't brush your teeth. Once you're hooked, that you can't brush your teeth unless you fix first. Okay? I could have never got to Synanon unless I was smacked back. Because that was the only way they can get me to Connecticut, to throw me in a car to get me across the country. So, and I could never go because every time there was some arrangements made for me to go someplace, something always happened. Either the connection wasn't there, or I would like Lightweight OD and Mr. Ride, and it was always something. But I wasn't going anywhere unless I was artificially encouraged. Okay, because I know that when I used heroin, a piece of me was gone. I even used to say, it feels like something is physically missing, and that's what heroin does to you. Maybe it does the same thing to the alcoholic, because everything seems similar. You know, the chemical replaces something, and then you depend on the chemical. And when you don't have that chemical, you're always like in a state of panic and fear all the time. So, and you can't stop it. You know, and when I started getting arrested, I used to say, wow, thank God I got arrested, because they rescued me. I couldn't do it. There was no way I was going to give up voluntarily. I mean, if I was fixed real good, then I would. But as soon as I start to come down, I remember jumping out a second-story window in Manhattan State General, escaping from the nut house, because the dope started to wear off. And when I realized where I was, I panicked. So that's what it was like then. So I guess maybe he never lost that thing that once you use them drugs, you start to lose little at a time, and it gets harder and harder to get it back. And that's where the therapy is required. You know, a lot of things, because most people start doing that stuff when they're young, they miss out on a lot of growing up, and not just emotionally. You know, a lot of things go by them about relationships with women. You know, I find myself 50 years old still talking to women like I was 14, and I get embarrassed by it still sometimes. It's because of that retardation that happens emotionally and stuff when you start that. Also, I really don't know how to ask for a job. Thank God I was a contractor, you know, but stuff like that, and that's where the therapy comes in. I find that when we get put in a position to learn these different things, to develop these social skills that, because of our addiction, or because of the circumstances, the old man used to say we were junkies before we ever stuck a harpoon in our arms. Look where we came from. You know, there were a lot of character disorders running around in my neighborhood when I was a kid. So, and it's getting yourself in a position where you can grow up in a healthy environment. Now, usually kids that grow up in a healthy environment where everything in the environment is pretty healthy, kids don't usually turn out to be a drug addict or a criminal or a social misfit. I mean, that's how I look at it. And I think the first taste of that was sin, and I think that they realized that something like that had to be done, and they talked, and they read, and they studied, and they did a lot of different things. I know that they opened my mind when I was there to a lot of stuff I was never aware of.
And I had tried different ways of cleaning up from drug abuse and prostitution 25 years ago. For about 4 years I tried before I was ever able to do so. And I never met a person who was successful at doing it until 1967. And I had been to Lexington, Kentucky, been a part of the LSD experiments with LSD and hypnosis, and left there in worse shape than I went in. I had been in state hospitals because that's all there was. There just weren't any other places. So I think that the role model, the concept of role modeling was the most important for me at first. There were no role models there. There were people in uniforms. There were people telling you what to do. You would see a psychiatrist once a week or every other week if you acted out and you know, stamped your feet or threw a little tantrum. And the purpose of that was to get more medication. I went to private psychiatrist. I had myself committed to a state hospital because there was no place else to go. The psychiatrist always wound up writing prescriptions. In Lexington, the same thing happened. I always had sleeping medication. I always had tranquilizers during the day. And the belief that I was hopeless was always reconfirmed. The way that I felt about myself was reconfirmed because the message was that I was hopeless and I couldn't get through a day without some kind of medication. The pain was too great. And the LSD experiment with hypnosis was probably the most traumatic because it was truly an experiment. It was 2 doctors in a room with me. I was given the LSD and asked a lot of questions. These were tape recorded. Then I was isolated for 24 hours with paper and pencil with nobody to talk to. And I was to write everything that came through my head. And then there were sessions where this was then played back. Some of the things were played back without the LSD. So no, there were not any role models. There were only doctors. And seclusion was the coin of the realm, you know. If you were having difficulty, you know, it was either medication or you could go into seclusion on your own. I left there and immediately went to the Connections and overdosed that evening and wound up in an alley where a friend found me on her way into the Connections house. So no, there were no role models at all. There were people that I knew, but they were all using.
I really don't remember too many places that I felt I could go to be safe. There was one point with my family after I started using when I was 13, drinking alcohol from 10. You know, they finally realized I had a problem. And after all the years, maybe around 16, they realized, and 17, that I had a problem. I went to prison. That was probably the only place I knew that was a therapeutic community. I mean, I knew no other, you know. Then I came out of prison, I cleaned up. I tried to make it on my own. I couldn't make it because I didn't have the tools to make it, the understanding of who I was or what I was. So I failed again. They took me to a psychiatrist, and that was the most embarrassing and most disappointing part of my whole life. Because I sat there talking to someone. They listened, nodded their head, and I really felt like I wanted to try. You know, I told him some things about myself, and all he did was nod his head, and you know, he listened to me and said a few words, and I didn't feel any different when I left the office than I did before. So I went right back to my culture and my group and, you know, my guys I was using with. I really felt like there was no hope. I wouldn't, you know, I was condemned to hell, and that's the way it is. So I did that. So I had nothing, and then I found out about Synanon. You know, my uncle had found out. He was a gambler. He found out through different people. He tried to get me to come to Synanon. I wouldn't go. You know, I lied, took money, said I was going to go next week, next month. But finally, I hit the bottom through different events in my life, and I finally got there. You know, that was the first therapeutic community that I was involved in, but I didn't feel like it was therapy. I felt like I had reached a place that I was safe in, you know, that I could express myself. I could make my mistakes. I know I looked like an asshole, you know, bumbling around. I was kicking, I was sick. They made me go out. I was still on the couch, and they put me out building a platform. They were going to have some kind of show in Westport. So, like, I really felt like it wasn't therapeutic. I never really looked at it that way. I always looked at it as a bunch of people. But Synanon was the first therapeutic community that I got involved in, that I trusted. You know, I guess if you want to say the first family I trusted, I didn't trust my own mother and father with the things I trusted them with me. I was in Woodburn Correctional Institution for about 1.5 years. It was supposed to be for teenagers, but it was a prison. Everything was going on in there. It was going on everywhere else. You know, the kids getting raped, the stealing, the drugs, the violence, being locked in a cell, being on a number, you know, cutting yourself off to the point where I would just sit and look out a window day after day. That's how I spent, because I couldn't trust nobody. Because I seen things that happened in there that, you know, was sad. You really seen the devil. You really seen it, inhumane people, people who are frightened and scared, acting out all their nightmares. I mean, it was like a nightmare. That's what it was, prison. Like I wasn't really awake. I was just part of a nightmare. And that's how I felt in there. I'm still dealing with problems that happened to me when I was 8 years old. I'm going to go back and talk to my sister about it, you know, and the things that happened to me when I was even younger, 5 years old, that happened with her because of my thing where I was molested as a kid. I've always questioned my manhood. I was always afraid to hold children in my arms because I might do the same thing, and I didn't want to do to somebody what was done to me, all right? I cut myself off from my father and his love and his physical touching because, I was afraid of him. You know, the thing with religion with my mother and catching us in bed, they sent me out of the house to live with my grandmother. And at that point, I felt like an outcast in my own family, that I had done something against God and the church and my sister. And I used to beat my sister. I used to beat her up terribly, never knowing why. I wanted to always, matter of fact, just before I came here, she asked me why I always beat her up. Now I got the answer. I'm 52. I spoke about this in Synanon maybe 10, 12 years ago, and I'm still working on it. You know, life is a process.
When the therapeutic community movement went to New York and Daytop and Phoenix House developed, there again was another departure, and that departure had to do with moving from a position of self-reliance to accepting government money. And the way that the TC movement has evolved in the last 30-some-odd years has been primarily through an oral tradition. It's been through an oral tradition and by people coming and visiting different communities and looking at the forums and saying, okay, that's a very frequent question I get. What's your schedule? What's your daily schedule? How do you negotiate through the day? As these forms are replicated and as the oral tradition is passed on, something has been lost in the passing. So if we're going to move into the future successfully, we better understand what some of the basic assumptions were around which this whole movement was formed. You can change the forms if you understand the essence. Good mechanics are much better drivers. People who don't understand how the engine of a car works drive like me. And I'm not a very good driver. If I'm going on a long trip, I like to have somebody with me that really understands how the car works. How does the car work in a therapeutic community? What are some of the assumptions that are really part of the engine? I'm going to tell you some of those. That within the community, and this doesn't necessarily mean a residential ranch in the middle of Tucson. This can be something that's a community without walls where people are coming during the day. This can be on a street corner, you know, organizing a neighborhood if you're taking and applying the therapeutic community model. This can be in a maximum security prison. This can be in any place. What are some of the assumptions? The first one that's important is that everybody that participates is engaged in living publicly rather than privately. Now remember, the very first therapeutic community didn't have staff. What happened when Phoenix House and Daytop started taking government money? Well, they started employing people. That's not bad, but we need to remember that we have people employed, and this whole movement started with people helping each other. Public versus private. Those people who are engaged in helping form the emotional environment, painting the colors of the emotional walls, have to be willing to be forthright about who they are. They have to demonstrate that. If you're coming from the streets, if you're coming from a penitentiary, if you're coming from a life where you've been living a lot of pain, if you have been keeping secrets in your family about incest or molestation or abuse, or the fact that your mom is a heroin addict and maybe she fixed you once, or whatever, or you had to give your children up, people have to feel safe enough to be public about those things. People have to be safe enough to be public about their pain. And that means that everybody does. But the people who are the elders in the community have to set that the ceiling and the standard for honesty.
I think sharing our experiences and becoming involved in the community or in our day-to-day living and showing how showing other people in our lives how we live a good life, hopefully, so that other addicts can see that there's something else to look forward to out there. I know that I had some role models in my life that I look back on now that were very important to me, and they gave me the hope to go on, because there were times when I didn't think that any of this was worth it, and I saw people that were failing all the time, and I thought, it's just not worth it to me. So these people kept me going. I think it's important that people be public with their lives, and not only the participants, but the staff, and not only in the community, but at home and in other parts of your life. It would have to be all the way around. And I've believed that before. I've heard the public versus private. It's just a concept that seems right to me anyways.
People, all the people involved in the community have to have a way of being a participant. If you're on the street and you're using drugs, you're a spectator to the life experience. Drug use provides an emotional, synthetic, drug use is kind of a plastic, synthetic, emotional experience. Okay, you're making yourself feel good by putting a substance up your nose or in your arm or in your mouth in some way, shape, or form. It's a synthetic experience. You're watching everything, but you're just having a synthetic experience with yourself. When you stop using drugs, a person stops using drugs, you begin to feel a little bit rigid because you haven't participated in too many different things in life. You haven't sat down at too many gracious dinners. You maybe haven't been on a softball team. You haven't made a dress, dug a ditch, built a friendship that's based on something other than that. So everyone in the community has to figure out ways to participate. If you're somebody that's an elder in the community, because you've been here for a while or because maybe you're a staff member, how many different kinds of settings can you provide for people to participate in? Okay, any person that works in the therapeutic community as a staff person or someone who's been around for a while should be someone who's providing settings on a regular basis for people to participate rather than watch. That may be painting, that may be baseball games, it could be a lot of different things. It could be setting up a room so that's user-friendly, so when you walk into that room, the room feels like home. It doesn't feel like a hospital or a prison or an institution. I don't like having my desk, you know, so that people are sitting on the other side of the desk, because I think that sends a message. I can't participate in the same way in a conversation with somebody if they're on the other side of a desk. I like circular kinds of situations.
Robin is one person that I really think about a lot, because a couple weeks ago we had, at There's a Willow, we had a focus day, and she worked out there in the yard with us. She helped us pull weeds, cut, chop, carried the piles of grass, and dumped it and everything. Makes us feel like she's one of us. And not, even though she's in the staff position or whatever, she doesn't interact like a staff. She puts herself in the residents' level.
Personal authority rather than vested authority. What happened when those people went to Lexington, Kentucky? What happened when those people were wrapped up in straitjackets? What happens when you have been given all different kinds of labels? You're a whore, you know, you're a convict, you're a junkie, you're a dope fiend, you're a crack mother, you know, the drug war is being fought against you. What happens? You already feel pretty excluded. Okay, there's an exclusionism that extends beyond racism if you found yourself that far outside. If you have always paid, if you're a woman that's paid the taxi driver with sex and not money, if you have been left in a dumpster for dead, if you have left your children at a dope house for collateral, if you have learned how to walk through a prison corridor with a lot of bread in your mouth and you've got your bag on the inside with your dope, and the guard stops you and says, what do you have in your mouth? And you open your mouth and you just say, just bread. You're not going to necessarily respect somebody just because they walk up to you and they say, I'm the director. Okay? You're not going to respect somebody if they walk up to you and say, well, I have a PhD, you should listen to me. You're going to respect somebody if they earn your respect. And it's very important that your respect is earned because you don't respect yourself. You don't respect yourself. So personal authority, that means that every single person that walks in the door, every single person that engages in the model, and it doesn't matter if you're staff and it doesn't matter if you're a, quote, resident coming for help, every person has the opportunity to earn the respect of other people. There's a lot of ways of earning respect. There's a lot of ways of developing personal authority. And if you happen to work in this field, you have to earn that authority with every single new peer group that comes in your door. It can't just be, you know, you can develop a reputation, but if the place is going to stay real and the place is going to have some depth and the place is going to keep growing, you have to keep earning that respect. And what happens if you keep earning that respect? You get in the role of student and you begin to learn how the streets are changing. Because if you're earning that respect, you're going through the discipline of really listening to people who are walking in the door. You're listening about how the prison culture has changed. You're listening and you're finding out about what really goes on and the degradation that can occur to a 14-year-old in a crack house. You got to earn your authority. And that opens up the whole place because then some 14-year-old coming in, if you take the time and show the respect to earn the authority from that person, then they know that they too have a chance because they can begin to engage in making gestures of humanity in the environment that have some meaning. You can earn personal authority by developing for yourself a repertoire of gestures of humanity. You remember people's birthdays. You know their middle names. You discover what they really like to eat. You set up the environment so it feels human and it can feel like home. Most people change more easily when they feel safe, when they feel at home, when somebody smiles at them, not when somebody is explaining to them, I'm the doctor and you're not. I'm well and you're not. I'm happy and you're not. What are the points of empathy? That's how you earn, that's how you can develop that. Everybody that is in the environment has something to teach. And that's another way of developing personal authority, acknowledging that everybody has something to teach. Every single person can be a credible teacher to somebody else. Everybody. You can be a credible teacher if there's some gift that you have. You read well. You can be a credible teacher if you don't read well and you know how to dig a ditch or make a bed and show respect. What are the gifts that people have that they can give to one another? Community of choice, rather sort of versus family of origin. People that come for help, the therapeutic community itself is never going to replace somebody's family of origin. You can't do that. A lot of the families of origin today are just utterly shattered. But you can give somebody a toolbox. You can teach people how to build a community of choice for themselves. What if somebody comes in and their entire family is using drugs and there's no family to go back to? They could be 14, they could be 40. You've got to teach people how to build relationships, what are the building blocks of a friendship, how do you treat a friend, how do you learn how to laugh, what are some of the things you can participate in with a friend. So you can go when someone moves out of a therapeutic community or goes to a different state and they can go to a school, they can go to a job site, they can join the PTA, they can help with the brownies, and they can begin to build those relationships so they can build a community of choice wherever they may go. People need to know how to do that. And in any environment, therapeutic community environment, we should be improving those skills all the time. What are some of the ways that we can give people tools for their toolbox so they can build a community of choice for themselves? Jobs and roles versus just jobs. And this is really critically important. Anyone who comes in has a job to do. You might be working in a therapeutic community and getting a paycheck. You might be coming here for help. Everybody's got a job. Everybody's got some finite, sustained responsibility that they engage in every single day. Somebody may not have all of their mental faculties. Maybe they sniff too much glue. There's still something they can do. Okay? They can water the plants. My experience has been that people will tend to match the expectations that you have of them. If you have expectations and you keep raising those expectations, they can match them. All of us are capable of doing a lot more than we do. But people have to have finite jobs that are defined, chores, something that they do every day. With that, though, and this is staff and residents, everybody, this is the janitor, this is everybody, the community works best if everybody also is conscious of the roles that they can play. Why is that so important? Well, one of the ways you can teach people about opportunity is demonstrating that human beings can play a lot of different roles. What happens when you're on the street? Maybe you have a nickname. Maybe you're prostituting. Maybe you're known for your right hook. Maybe you're incarcerated. You get into one role. You get into one very finite kind of constipated role if you're chasing drugs. Maybe you're known for your burglaries. You're not known for too much that's terribly good. Maybe you're known for your ability to do credit card scams and play the guitar once in a while. You have to find some different roles, and the easiest way to teach people different roles to play is to have the elders in the community, people who have been around longer, play some different roles. The role of elder, the role of being a sister, the role of somebody who will really listen, the role of teacher, the role of someone who provides humor, the role of someone who will consistently sit down and read the letter that you just got that is making you horribly upset. The role of somebody who can reduce fear. There's certain people that can walk into a room and just kind of reduce the fear level when people are anxious. What are the roles that you can play? And how successful are you teaching people to play other roles in their own life? I used to leave the facility, and I used to be very nervous sometimes if I had a very new staff, different places that I was working that were just learning about this process. And I would call in all the different staff people one at a time and all the different folks in the environment one at a time, and I would give every single person an assignment. I would say, John, I'd really like you, to make sure you follow up on Mark because he's getting a visit this weekend, and I know he's a little bit nervous about it, and you're really good, you've got a really good sense of humor, and I'd like you to play that role with him and kind of be a bouncing board and be support. And then I might turn around to Mark and say, Mark, I'd like you to really make sure that when the seminar happens on adoption, you touch bases with Becky afterwards and make sure that she talks in that particular seminar, because I know that's something that's going to touch her and affect her particular life. Then I'll tell Becky, listen, if there are any new women coming in, I'd like you to make sure that you talk with some of the other gals and include them, because they're very new, but they've been here about 3 or 4 weeks, and if they're included in the interview process with the brand new gal that's coming in over the weekend, they're going to begin to realize some of the things that they learned. By the time I walked off that particular facility, whatever that day was, everybody had something to do that I then could follow up on. What we're trying to do is we're trying to teach people to feel good about themselves. The more different kinds of people you have in an environment from different backgrounds, from different socioeconomic classes, of different ages, with different sexual orientations, the better off your community has the potential of being. Because all different kinds of people always have prejudice about each other. If the people can engage in the process of overcoming the prejudices they have about each other, it makes it that much easier for them to overcome the prejudice they have about themselves. And you can begin to give those kinds of things as role assignments. Who's the person in the environment that's going to really teach about African American culture and make sure that Juneteenth is celebrated? Who's the person in the environment that's going to teach about Cinco de Mayo? Who is the person in the environment that's going to really start talking about the violence of language and the kinds of words that can elicit from women or people with certain experiences all of their pain if they're used in inappropriate kinds of ways? You can assign all of these things to different people. Think about it for a second and see how many roles do you play in the course of your day in the therapeutic community. How many roles can you identify? How many times can you just switch yourself from being the boundary setter to the accepting, non-judgmental person? Okay? How many times a day can you flip yourself from the role of the teacher to someone who walks into a room of maybe 15 brand new people who have just come in from the streets or the penitentiary and say, you be my teachers, and you tell me what your last week was like. Okay. Got to flip those roles all the time. All the time. And the more you can do that, the bigger role vocabulary you have, if you happen to work in one of these places, the more opportunities you are providing for people. If you can then begin to articulate some of the roles that you play, you're building hope. You're building hope. How good are you at having fun? How good are you at leisure time? How do people see you demonstrating relationships? Do they see you demonstrating nurturing with other people? Does cleaning up and not being on the block look like it's more worthwhile an endeavor than being back on the block? A lot of times people will be clean for a year or two and they'll say, is this it? You know, really? I'm going to be responsible?
I believe for me to be a positive role model for them helps them hopefully come down to the center a little bit more often. They see me going to work every day, constantly talk about the positive things of my marriage and my daughter and my family. So I think the role that I play, especially with them, anything that I can help them out with in my daily actions, I think is very important. Making the group setting not only an emotional place for people to sit in and feel comfortable, but also a humorous place that they can see different sides of that. In order for them to open up, they need to hear that from us. If nobody in the circle is talking about things that they may be keeping deep down inside, they're not going to talk about them. And in our community, everybody sits in a circle at eye level, and there is no one on the top. So it's important for the newest person in the door to hear somebody across the chair from them say, hey, I was molested at 7 years old. Or from the strongest person sitting in the circle, that's the 14 flat person from prison that says, you know, I was raped in prison. It takes that person, and that person starts to feel a little bit more comfortable about themselves, and they may not open up in that group, but they know that there's a safe place for them to talk about the bad things that have happened to them in their lives.
Whole person versus symptom. In community, we spend very little time talking about what crack cocaine really does to your brain. It's valuable, it's good to know. The whole person is a lot more important than just the drug. The drug use is a symptom. The drug use is a symptom of a lot of other things. The drug use is a way to deal with pain. The drug use is a way to keep things repressed. The drug use is a way to feel emotionally safe. The drug use is a way to be social. The drug use is a way to make money. The drug use is a lot of things. Who's the person? Who's the self that's behind all of those different masks? What is somebody like? Sometimes if someone has used drugs for 15 or 20 years or started using when they're very little, they may not even know what they like. So it's very important to look at that person and say, okay, let's have you participate in a lot of different things. Let's try on some different roles, even if it's just for 5 minutes. Let's find some people that you can trust and you can believe in. And that's a very important thing to ask somebody periodically. Who do you trust? Who do you feel comfortable with? Who have you ever felt comfortable with? The whole person. What is their experience? Not just the symptom. If you begin to get to know the whole person, that means you're forming a real relationship with them. You're not just forming a relationship that's going to exist within the construct of a program. They're making some real connections. They're bonding with their own peers and with other people. If you worry about the whole person, the symptom will take care of itself. If you worry about the whole person, your forms in your particular community will change accordingly, okay? Somebody that has just spent 14 or 15 years in a penitentiary may not sit down easily and disclose in a group on the first day. Of course not. Why would somebody do that? It may be enough for that person to sit quietly and listen for 3 or 4 months. That's fine. Okay? If the person is quiet and you think they're not participating, pull them out and say, what are you getting out of this? And then have the patience to sit and listen. Look at the whole person. Don't try to apply a model with some very rigid forms and then fit the people into the model. Understand the assumptions. How can it be safe enough for people to be public, and what do you do as an individual to make it safe every day? What are the ways that you participate that help other people to participate? How do you every single day try and earn some relationship and some respect and some authority? And who are the 5 people that you do that with? Who are the people that you knew, if you work in this field 5 and 10 years ago, that are your friends today, that you can enjoy and have a good time with? How successful are the people that have gone through wherever it is that you happen to work in forming a community? What does their network of friends look like? Their community of choice. How are they doing if they happen to be at George Washington University or cooking in someplace in Phoenix, Arizona? The idea here is to get people started on a self-actualizing process that will continue for them after they leave wherever they happen to be. The idea here is to get people excited about learning. The idea here is to develop relationships that are real. I visited someplace recently, and there were a lot of people studying this community, and they were very worried that they didn't have a therapeutic community happening. A number of incredibly good people at a university, but they didn't know, is it real? Isn't it real? What are we doing? They had me come out and take a look at their place. Well, in the first 14 hours I was there, 7 people who had graduated about 6 months earlier showed up to say hello, to talk to the newer residents and say hello to the director. They had a community. They had relationships that were existing beyond just the program. There are a lot of other assumptions. There are more than we can talk about right now. We can talk about these in a lot more depth. But it's important to know that every single human being in the environment, no matter what job they have, does play a role. And it's very important to play it consciously. There's a great story about a woman who was alive who had an opportunity to experience while she was living both heaven and hell. And she decided she was going to go and experience hell first. And she got to hell, and there was a big room, dimly lit, people sitting at a banquet table. And she heard them wailing and moaning and carrying on and complaining. Beautiful food, beautiful room. She couldn't figure out exactly what was happening. And then when her eyes got adjusted to the light, she saw that everyone had spoons that were very, very, very long. They were so long that when they dipped into the spoon, they couldn't put it in their mouth. She went to heaven. It was the exact same scene, but everyone was laughing and having a really good time. They were feeding each other. Therapeutic community at its best, everyone is feeding each other. Thank you.